Well, there was no fear beyond smacking myself on the wall
Mhm.
and knocking sense into myself. It was all about me dealing with me and having to being forced into a reckoning with the I am, with the witness. And
Okay.
the witness then comes in as the golden chariot, as the cavalry. The witness becomes the remedy and the solace. The witness becomes the magic wand. Because when we enter into a state of the I am, of the pure witness, which is the living gospel, the living testament, when we step into that and become a true child of God, which is standing directly beneath central sun and casting no shadow, so pure truth and right action become all that you really understand, all that navigates you forward. That's not to say lousy things don't happen in life and bad circumstances don't occur, but it means that you navigate them nonetheless, simply on the axis of that cross of pure truth and right action. That doesn't understand fear.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Starseeds Speak. I am quite pleased to have in the studio today Sacha Stone, an unexpected blessing on my path. And Sacha, your reputation precedes you. I'm not sure we need a lot of introduction. Lots of people know your work. So thank you for being here. I appreciate that.
Very
Yeah.
happy to see you again. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, for those who don't know you, maybe, people on my channel, my audience, how I know you or how I perceive you is, you've been working tirelessly for the liberation of humanity for a really long time in a very passionate, tireless, yeah, devoted way, which I really admire. So that's the soundbite I would give on you. And also, I was thinking back this morning, getting ready for our call today, like when did I first find you? And I think it was work you were doing with Robert David Steele some years ago with the International Tribunal for Natural Justice in the child trafficking, and that ITNG, which you also Jay, which you founded, correct? Yeah.
Yes, thank you for raising that. In fact, in a month from now, just over a month, I will be announcing the next and probably last Judicial Commission of Inquiry by the ITNJ, and this time it's into the crime of ages, the doctrines of discovery, the Vatican, and how the Vatican, the hegemony of blood sacrifice and what have you, issuing from the Caesars of Rome 2,000 years ago, led to the Vatican complex, and the Vatican complex became really the underwriter to the crowns of Europe, which were then given license under the papal flag to go forth and conquest the world in the name of God and Holocaust the black skin, brown skin, red skin, yellow skin, and white skin people. So that is the biggest story untold. Well, no, there are bigger stories. We want to go back to the galactic wars, but let's talk about
Yeah.
in our age,
Yeah.
we need to reckon with 500 years of Vatican blood sacrifice and genocide, essentially, and what issued through the crowns of Europe to become the new world, which was really empire, Washington, D.C., City of
Mhm.
London, Basel, Switzerland, and the Vatican City, being essentially the stronghold of that long-standing Sabbatean, Draconian, Babylonian um,
Mm.
magic, ritualistic priest banker echelon that is being dismantled right now. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, a good segue into so much. And thank you for that. And for also for people who don't know, I mean, Sasha, you grew up in Rhodesia in the War for Independence, now called Zimbabwe in Southern Africa. And I mean, can you speak to how that, it may seem like a simple question, but how that has also informed your trajectory in working for humanity's liberation?
Sure, it's a complex question, and because Zimbabwe, which was Rhodesia, is a shit show of epochal proportion. And you've got to see Rhodesia, the country I was born into, and as a generational African, I grew up there during what you is called the War for Independence. It was a staged war. It was the Cold War playing out in Africa. Um, so it was very much a Babylonian agenda in that sense, fomenting discord between the whites and the blacks in Rhodesia. Not the same thing as South African apartheid by a long chalk, but nonetheless, it conflated into a full-on guerrilla war, which was horrible. And I grew up in that. And when that was finished, I was bounced out of the country and essentially with refugee status for the next 9 odd years, during which time I became a sort of shock poet, rock and roll musician. That was my thing.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
that segued into me setting up my Peace Foundation. And for many years now, I've been doing my own brand of citizen diplomacy and shit stirring, really stirring that pot of the globalists and the Sabbateans and the Pharisees, the Latter-day Pharisees, and how that evil empire, which has eventuated into the thing called government, which continues to thrive by the harvest of humanity and the sacrifice of innocence when we understand the games going on in the basement. But let's go back to Africa briefly. Africa is on the cusp of a huge renaissance, in my view, and my view is never wrong in these things. So we're about to see in the next 18 months to 48 months, Africa surge ahead and take preeminence on the world stage as the cornerstone of the global economy, not just the one that's coming, but the one that we've lived through in the last, millennia.
Hmm.
So going back to King Solomon and, Queen of Sheba, the resources of Africa, whether you're talking about cobalt or diamond or gold or oil, gas or water or biodiversity, it is just the cornerstone of the planet in so many ways. It was also the touchstone of the gods to this plane of existence. And that's been lost to us for a long time. So the dark continent, the lost world, the lost innocence is connected to the loss of innocence, and paradise lost is also connected to that long story of forgetting the mother, forgetting Africa, forgetting the genesis point of our own story. And we're forced now in this apocalyptic end of days, delightful circus that's going on right now with the collapse of governments and taxations and the collapse of global economics and all of this wonderful kind of disruption that's taking place is giving us a gentle nudge at the moment. It might end up being a punch in the face, but at the moment, it's a gentle nudge reminding us to look back to the genesis of our story and reconvene relationship with Africa. And I've started to do my most of my work is kind of focused there, certainly in the last year, and
Yeah,
very
yeah, yeah.
so. It's
You
exciting.
bring an awesome perspective. I mean, I've always had this fascination with Africa. I've only traveled to North Africa and not beyond. It's out there in my mind and also in my psychic visions as this, as you say, incredibly potent place and an origin point, which been given all of these, I don't know how to say, going back to like the beginning of time and something important happening between what's present exopolitically on our planet now with the geopolitical landscape and so on and so on. So I love that you can speak so eloquently to that and with, again, such a passionate voice and an intelligent voice. So I appreciate because Africa to us is largely off the map, and there's a reason for that, unless it's for our conquest, right? So thank you, and I will be paying attention to what unfolds there. So
Very good.
much story there. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So, um, going back to like you such a rich history, your story from Rhodesia into, your career as a rock musician, artist, poet. Where were you? What was your life like? And I've got some questions about some encounter you might have had in the 90s, and I'm curious if you could give us some context about what was happening in your world around your encounter with possibly Draco Reptilian.
Sure.
Um,
Sure. And it's something I've only spoken about, I think, in the last year or so to my community. And it's a subject matter which, I mean, I did share this with David Icke many years ago, probably 15 odd years ago, in my living room. And
Yeah.
it's a story I did share with him, I think, before anyone else, but because he, of course, is the progenitor of reintroducing that,
Yeah.
that not thematic back into the mainstream narrative, but he was really the one who dragged the remembrance of the Draco-reptilian interfacing with the human genome. He dragged that back into the mainframe in the last 2 decades. And so I did feel comfortable many years ago speaking to David about that in private, and obviously to friends and
Yeah.
what have and interested parties. And as my own work has also been involved for many years in helping to progress and advance that story in exopolitics, as you rightly call it. Um, for instance, 15, 16, 17, 18 years ago, I was interfacing with, at that time, Stephen Bassett and the New Paradigm Research Group. He was really the foremost guy at the vanguard of exopolitics. And I met all of those people. I'm now getting back into that saddle somewhat. I'll be later this year in the Middle East in Dubai doing the first Galactic Disclosures Conference with Zahi Hawass
Mm.
and Elena Danan and Dan Willis and other friends.
Yeah.
I'm happy to get back in and start talking about this story, this stuff, because the more diplomatic, tactical stuff that I was working on, I've done. The United Nations bit, the hacking in there, the bit about establishing the New Earth Initiative and then rolling that forward. And I had to play a bit more of a sanitized game, and not speak about aliens and reptiles and things,
Yeah.
except private.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
I'm really happy to start to dial into that stuff, not to be opportunistic about it, because I've always been holding those stories and progressing that stuff in the work I do. But I've not spoken about my own personal interfacing with this subject matter. And I do, the more I look at it, I have an extraordinary um, set of stories connected to extraterrestrial intervention and how this narrative now fast becomes the most important narrative on the horizon, because it is also connected to the return of innocence, and it's connected psycho-civilizationally. We have to do the reckoning with the little alien fuckers with the, slanty eyes. We have to
Yeah.
deal with Draco-reptilian aspect of the human genome. We've got to start to reconcile the galactic ancestral origins and the blood song that courses through our mitochondria, our DNA. We have to do that reckoning. We have no choice. If we don't, we'll continue to be self-fulfilling, the cycle of entropy and of death and karma and dharma, that wheel, which is a tired wheel. We want to move on beyond that as a genus, as a species. And
Mm.
the only way we're going to do that is once we galvanize the collective gestalt into a reckoning with the truth of our own genome. So the human being is the galactic genome. We are the universal genome.
Yes. Yes.
We're also the God genome in that
Yes.
sense, the cosmic genome. Owning that Alpha Omega is the and flaming the collective human heart and remembrance into that reckoning is what will activate the so-called spiral of Alcyone, and the so-called ascension will be upon us. The vertical ascension will loom once we reach that collective threshold of remembrance and of reckoning with the truth of our own standing universally. So to that end, the handful of seminal stories that I have to tell about my own experience with non-terrestrial intelligences and technologies, not just
Yes.
creatures, but
Mm.
also technologies. Now, I do have stories to tell, and I will be dialing that stuff up in a much bigger way later this year. So I'm going to use the Galactic Disclosures Conference in the United Arab Emirates to do that, because it's the
Mm.
perfect place to
Hmm.
to
Yes, it is.
yeah. But
Yes.
but I will touch momentarily on the story that interests you, because I think I mentioned it um, in our interview for the
In our
Lazarus.
interview, my interview with you,
Yeah.
you mentioned that, and I kind of went, okay, that's a topic I'm quite curious about.
So
So,
here's the thing. The Lazarus um, community is where I tell those stories and tend to not bring them into
Yeah.
the other elements. However, I'm trusting that your audience is like-minded with mine. Not that I give a damn about offending anyone. It's just that I don't like to tell these stories just for sensationalism.
It's not, yeah, exactly. It's not about, oh, this big thing that I saw in all of the flash, bang, boom, and bright lights about it. It's not about that. Yeah.
Right. In simple terms, I did have an interface, and it was in 1996 in London, in England, and I did have an interface with what you would call a Imperial Draco reptile. Certainly, that's what after the fact I understood it to be. When it manifested in broad daylight in my living room on a beautiful sunny afternoon, whilst I was being interviewed by an Italian journalist. Um,
Mm.
that was a journalist who had been lobbying to do an interview with me with my record label for months, and I eventually agreed to it only on because she was incredibly pretty journalist, and I agreed to the thing. She flew
Okay, fine. Yeah.
flew to England from Italy, from Torino in Italy, and conducted the interview. And minutes into the interview, she went catatonic and
Oh,
started glazed expression and just froze, looking at the floor. And at that, I thought that she was having some kind of a conniption or a seizure of sorts, and was leaning in just to ask her, "Are you all right?" And at that moment, felt this heat and turned and saw this Tyrannosaurus Rex creature crouching in the room. It was so tall it couldn't stand. It was way higher than the ceiling. So the
yeah.
whole thing had manifested crouching in my room, and its face was inches from mine. And it was clearly about to eviscerate me. I knew it was a pure, raw, unfiltered, um, horrific death that I was staring at. And my way of dealing with it, or at least the brain's way of dealing with that kind of existential crisis, in my case, was to hurl myself into the concrete wall. And my brain suggesting to me that I stood more chance of surviving pushing my molecules through steel and concrete than getting past this creature to the door. And that was interesting, certainly after the fact, to look back and go, how can you literally throw yourself into a wall bodily because your brain is computing that you can survive that more than this? That for me was really interesting piece to look at after the fact. But having hit the wall, it did knock some, I guess, some sense into me momentarily, and time did at that moment dilate, which I've subsequently understood happens again in these kind of super critical existential moments. And
Yes.
as
Mhm.
it did dilate, it I was able to really convene a relationship with the I am, with the God witness, the godly witness, the true self. And that clearly was the benediction, the blessing of this kind of horrendous event horizon. Because in engaging relationship with myself, slowing everything down, my brain was saying, you've thrown yourself into steel and concrete. That didn't work. You're not going to get past that creature in this state without being eviscerated. She was still catatonic and was not going to save me, nor was Ezekiel's chariot going to save me. So what happened was my consciousness was brought into a singularity
Mm.
of supercritical presence of the I am. And then what I recognized instantly was that anything that I was witnessing in that state of grace was perfect geometry, and was I was not the victim of. So immediately I lost the sense that I was a victim to this creature. But in point of fact, this creature was the sum total of the entirety of the expression of the evolution of my soul through the fiction of time, going back millions of years, and that this thing was not here to harm me. In fact, no evil comes to harm us unless we will it to harm us. It comes to serve as the contrast or the texture against which you must define your angelic super nature. And so that's what happened. I was able to then look at this creature close up, see its yellowed lizard eyeballs, and recognize that I am that thou art. And I think that that was the utterance that came through me, expressed itself to that creature. And I guess that was empathy. I guess that was a kind of universal love and saying, we're not separate. We are together. You serve me, I serve you. And that was it. Boom. In that reckoning of pure truth, in the geometry of the living moment, this draconian lizard popped out of the existence, and but the permissions were no longer granted. My life force was no longer prepared to be feasted off by myself, by an aspect of self. So
Mm.
that disempowered the creature, which teaches me a great deal about the mechanics of evil or the mechanics of Satan or the devil, however we want to look at this archetypal notion of an evil that exists outside of self. And the journalist woke up from a catatonic state. Instantly, this creature disappeared, and she was in a massive panic. And then I realized that she was a apparently willing agent in this exercise, that she'd come as a catalyst of this event horizon. And I did lunge at her and grab her probably by the throat. I can't quite remember, but I did grab her and drag her out of my house and threw her into the street with her bag and whatever else. I was in a high state of adrenalized state.
Adrenalized. You'd be totally
Yeah.
adrenalized at that
Yeah,
point. Yeah,
and then
absolutely.
I went back into my home, and she hadn't been in there for longer than 30 minutes. I mean, the whole thing had happened so quickly, and then I had to really then there was another layer of reckoning. How do you reconcile your contextual framework of reality into something which you have no reference or guide
Yeah.
for? I'd never read a book on reptiles. David Icke hadn't emerged in the world, to my knowledge, in my world. I didn't have any reference point for that Draco reptile. So it was only later that I had to really look deeply into it and then understand the connection between that and me, and then understand the mechanics of empathy, the mechanics of love, which is the thing that absolves and qualifies and phase conjugates out of the hologram any contrast or shade. So that then
Yeah.
teaches me in purely mathematical terms that we must go forth as capacitors of God force, and we must love, and we must be loved, and we must affirm and create and expand and be utterly, utterly fearless and bold. So that's where the apparency of my fearlessness came from, was surviving that event horizon. So it was hugely consequential and valuable to me. Yeah.
Yeah, how life-changing. I mean, how life-changing, Sasha. I mean, what a perspective shift. And I'm curious, it must have been for, I mean, was it days, weeks, months that did you have quite a bit of cognitive dissonance after this? Or
Yes.
like,
The dissonance lasted from that time, 96 through 97, 8, 9. It was really at the end of 1999 that it all came to roost. I was sitting in the royal court of the royal palace in Marrakesh as the guest of the royal family at that time, and I'd been out really in grace and favor, hiding out in Morocco for in 1999, 2000 for a couple of years. Actually, all in all, it was about 2.5 years, and bouncing between uh, Morocco and Egypt that time,
mhm.
setting up my Peace Foundation. But it was prior to even setting up my foundation in 1999 that I was in Morocco, and I was sat on a beautiful afternoon in the one of the courtyards, this ancient palace with these huge columns and mosaics that went up, looked
Yeah,
like I don't know how many meters high, but just colossal, and the beautiful orange trees and lime trees in the courtyard of the palace. And I was sat there, and the prince, my beloved friend, the Muley, was over the courtyard smoking hashish as he was always doing, and on the phone doing his thing. And I was sat with my back against one of these pillars, these huge columns, and of these ancient mosaics that were 1,000 years old. And I remember asking the question because the Moroccan sun had been helping to reconstitute me anyway, because it was very recent to that time that I'd run away from the music in 1999. So I'd run
yes,
from the music
yes,
and
yes,
I'd
yes.
run to Morocco. And there I am sitting there just burning with these universal questions like, what the fuck am I going to do with my life? And how can I be of service? And what happened? That whole music thing and that demon, that demonic stuff that emerged through the music thing, to my reckoning, and how I had to flee from that. And sitting there on that perfect afternoon in Marrakesh, and this asking the question, the burning question. This is the point of this
Yes, no, I'm,
geometry falls from this column, from like 40 feet up or 50 feet up. This piece of geometry, this of a mosaic that must have been placed there literally 1,000 years earlier. It falls to the floor in front of me. I mean, this is an ancient palace, and these are old walls. Bits of mosaic are falling out all the time. But it just so happened that this little piece of mosaic fell in front of me, and I picked it up. And it was a shape, a geometric form, and it was beautiful. It was green and white. It was beautiful. And I picked it up, and then I studied this geometry and understood that this was known as the breath of Allah, the compassionate. This was a unique geometric form that contained very powerful and beautiful magic. And indeed, that intersection, it was like kind of Merkaba language. And
yes.
that began for me a whole journey. Honestly, the journey began from the reconstitution of my psyche from the draconian experience and all of that, all locked in at that moment when that geometry fell. And that piece of geometry and that breath of Allah, the compassionate, then led me for many years. Many years it led me on my path, and I would find myself in places in the world on my insane diplomatic crusade that I was going to all sorts of wacky places to meet the mad mullahs and meet, royal houses and meet political and cultural and religious leaders around the world in search of dot, dot, dot. But that symbol kept appearing and reappearing. And finally, when I was in Bali, invited by the former President Abdurrahman Wahid Gusdur, who was the great Muslim cleric president of Indonesia many years ago. And he and I had a momentary kind of love affair before he died when we both met him as a blind Muslim cleric, this powerful leader, and I'd gone in just to interview him for my foundation and completely loved this man. And I was a student of Islam and Sufi scriptures and things, and I held my own as a scholar, a burgeoning scholar of Islamic schools of thought, and he was very impressed by me. The fact that this kind of recently retired, long-haired rock and roller shock poet came in speaking about, speaking about
Yeah.
Islam in such a way with I'm not a Muslim, but I studied it as part of my diplomacy. So he ended up taking me to Indonesia and saying, you're coming to Indonesia and as a gift after the fact. There's a beautiful story connected to him, which I won't tell you now, but why the president invited me to Indonesia. And I went and in that first visit to Indonesia, I went up to the town called Ubud, in the village, a village in Bali,
Mm.
and there I was being taken in to meet the king, and there at the on the pavement before you take your first step into the palace was the breath of Allah, the compassionate. That exact same symbol was.
The same thing repeating itself.
Yeah, it was in, and that I knew I'd arrived and that this was a seminal space for me. I've been living in Indonesia ever since, and my home is my primary home has been there ever since. That piece of geometry led me. And the reason why I'm speaking about it is because if I do write a book, and I've kind of recently agreed to do so with my literary agents, I will be writing this particular story about this piece of geometry and how it's a piece of geometry that indeed does speak to the reconstitution of the psyche, the broken psyche and the broken heart of humanity. And
Mm.
so it's one of those magical things. And that's a very long way of answering your question. How long did it take me to reconstitute my psyche after the experience with the Draco reptile? It was a couple of years, but it was a piece of geometry that helped reconstitute. And that's the point I'm trying to make here.
It's like the fractal source came into you at that point, or it awoke. It's
Exactly.
meaning to you, but it awakened perhaps at that moment. I don't know. Like, and these, I mean, I can really relate with my own experience. When you first mentioned the encounter with reptilian a bit mysteriously in our first interview for the Lazarus Initiative, I sensed just intuitively this was a really pivotal moment on your spiritual journey that unfolded everything for you, and without which you wouldn't be where you are now. I mean, is that a true thing?
Well, I wouldn't be in Tennessee.
Well, you wouldn't be in Tennessee. You
I
wouldn't,
know it.
you
I
know,
know.
without that interaction with this giant reptilian. I mean, is that what it took to kind of pivot your
It's
perspective to
what
recognize
it's
yourself?
what it took. It's what it took to smack me in
Yeah,
the mouth and remind me of that old Socratic wisdom flame that the only thing you know truly is that you know nothing at all. And to always remember that in a state of true humility, because you have to, if you want to walk as Daniel in the lion's den, so to speak, if you want to tread into those spaces, the kind of spaces that I chose to foray and adventure and journey. Some spaces incredibly beautiful and uplifting, others incredibly dark, like the ritualistic sacrifice of innocence and child trafficking and ritual satanic abuse, that kind of thing. Dark, nasty stuff. But you have to some great extent, um, be be clad with the armor of God in those spaces, or you won't. It's not that you won't survive bodily or physically, but psychically, psychologically, emotionally, you could be very, very harmed and injured by being in those spaces, and certainly doing what I was doing for many years, taking testimonies and investigating, and then setting up the tribunals and the seatings, and having to listen to every single survivor's story and go into the real depths of the diabolical witness of what occurred to those blessed survivors is something I wouldn't wish on anyone. Wouldn't wish on anyone. There are things that you can hear from a survivor of ritual satanic abuse that are so beyond the comprehension of a human being. How humans can do, or subhumans can do this to other humans is beyond comprehension. And you can't, it's very hard to shake those things off once you've heard them.
yes,
It's like seeing something that is, utterly wicked, and the kind of trauma and the delay, the cascade of delayed trauma that happens is a very, very real thing. And I, as a full-grown man in my 40s, I hit that space where I had to deal with psychic knots in the stomach and vomiting and fevers and just retching and cold fevers at night, just not being able to get these things out of my psyche. Because
yeah,
I'm not born as a strong individual. I'm not that creature. I had to learn how to, in a sense, shield myself.
yeah.
And it taught me. I mean, through those forays and those journeys, I've learned how to build something of an impenetrable. I'd call it a psychic shield more than
Psychic
anything.
shield, psychic shield. Yeah, I read you. Yes. But it is, to your point, it is traumatizing, not just for the survivor of SRA or, many things that we could talk about related, but to those who hear it or sense it or sensitive to it. If you're doing interviews and hearing those testimonies, it will imprint you forever. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, until, so here's the thing, until you recognize the perfect geometry of a ritual sacrifice, meaning to say, and this is not to say any part of it is acceptable or any part of it is wonderful or beautiful. It's not, but it is of universally judicious. What is happening in that event horizon? I had to learn this. And once I learned it, it changed everything about me and how I could walk into those spaces. I
Mm,
recognized one fine day that it is always, and I've said this multiple times, my own audience will be bored of me saying this, but I learned that it is the babe or the innocent, so-called innocent, in that encounter of ritual sacrifice that is the one at the soul level that is driving the event.
mhm.
It is a willful sacrifice at the oversoul level where these angelics come. They dive bomb into the world knowing they're going to be laid out on a slab in a ritual sacrifice. at the age of 3 weeks old or whatever, 3 months. But that's something, every single event that occurs, every vector in manifest time space is a covenant. It's a soul contract. Soul contract determine all manifest outcomes in relationship terms or relational terms in this world. That is undeniable, irrefutable, irrevocable, universal law at work. Again, pure truth. You cannot shake that. So you have to eventually see that it is those innocent angelic beings that are the ones not driving the event, but they're the ones, in a sense, allowing their blood to be imbibed. So their blood becomes the turning point. It becomes the catalyzing fractal light that turns the heart
Yes.
of darkness toward the light. It's
Yes. Yes.
the point of redemption in the abyss, you know.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, and thank you for saying that. It can be a bold statement when you first hear it, but that is exactly how I've metabolized and come to understand, make meaning of my own experiences. This is not a victim thing,
Oh,
but more a choice to experience certain things and to be part of that that godlight. That
no, more than that, Rebecca, more
yeah.
than that. You're being far too gracious. More than that. You are assuming the messianic mantle, and in that sense, the sufferance that you experienced was part of the mechanics of turning the wheel in the other direction for the heart of darkness. And that's a huge self-immolation, a kind of self-sacrifice that's done on the pyre of this particular a chaotic reality in the temporal world. And we're leaving that. And we're just departing the Saturnian satanic age now. We're moving briefly through the Luciferic age. We must be very mindful in the next few years we don't fall victim to that. But it's all good. It's all good here and after.
Thank you. I very much concur with that. Yeah. So just so I make sure I understand the context of 1996, were you at the end of your game with music at that point, or was
No, 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 no. I was still engaged up until I think 1999. I think I exited fully.
Mhm.
I have to say it's a nonsense to suggest that I had a career because I didn't. We were an independent hard rock band, and we were kind of playing with the fabric of being out there. As a big stadium. It was a beautiful band, great sound, and made up comprised of musicians that were way ahead of my grade. But we put out some fantastic albums. We had the best, the number one rock and roll agent in the world. We were out there. We made a number of albums and we did our thing, but we were independent. I did not want to sign two majors, so we were having, the A&R guys, removed from our concerts, literally had them thrown out. We were having fun with that. We were
Mhm.
self-financed, and we had our own record label, publishing label, merchandising, and our own management company, but we were distributed. We relied on distribution with at that time Warner Brothers, and we relied on radio play and MTV. So we had to, in a sense, when the valves were turned off on MTV and radio and distribution, that was it, baby. So when the contract was put in front of me at the very end, and I was told, walk away from your band, walk away from your management company, I threw myself on my sword and fled to Morocco.
Okay.
And I realized also that I would not have any control of my catalog, of my writing, it was, you had to make a decision to literally hand everything over, all executive control and creative control of your life. For what? For gold, for money and fame. That certainly was not enough for me. And that was when I ran in the other direction. That was really 1999.
99 was when it ended. And were you on a where were you spiritually? You can tell I'm poking around in here because I'm like, okay, so there's a catalyst that caused this to happen in 96. Were you seeking, you've always been a seeker. You've always been a seeker, have you not? I mean,
Oh, human beings by definition are all seekers.
yeah.
That's written into the mitochondria of the human being. We are here because we are curious and because we are inquiring after supernature, inquiring after divinity, inquiring after pure truth.
Yeah. And was that truth inquiry, was that a, kind of a pot boiling up over, the stove of your life at that point in 96, or was there particularly not so much?
No, that was a lot earlier. I mean, coming out of a bush war in Africa and
Mhm.
living behind grenade screens and military convoys for the first 15 years of your life, that teaches you a certain antipathy toward the status quo, toward the world out there, and toward authority, to be sure.
Yeah.
So that really was what's pitted me against um, the framework of reality, and I could have either gone, I guess, hardcore into rage, violence, drugs, and worse, or I could
Yeah.
just tap into my own angelic nature in that sense and find solace in poetry and art, and which is what I did, and that was where I moved. But yeah, it's a curious thing. There's nothing quite like being a war baby to set
Yeah.
you up in defiance against the status quo.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Thank you. That's informed everything in your life, I feel. In the Draco arrival, I hear in the span of almost non-temporal reality, a moment in a million years at once, that this appearance caused great fear, and also this, do I understand rightly, that it also caused a great deal of empathy to arise, a compassion arise in you?
Well, there was no fear beyond smacking myself on the wall
Mhm.
and knocking sense into myself. It was all about me dealing with me and having to being forced into a reckoning with the I am, with the witness. And
Okay.
the witness then comes in as the golden chariot, as the cavalry. The witness becomes the remedy and the solace. The witness becomes the magic wand. Because when we enter into a state of the I am, of the pure witness, which is the living gospel, the living testament, when we step into that and become a true child of God, which is standing directly beneath central sun and casting no shadow, so pure truth and right action become all that you really understand, all that navigates you forward. That's not to say lousy things don't happen in life and bad circumstances don't occur, but it means that you navigate them nonetheless, simply on the axis of that cross of pure truth and right action. That that doesn't understand fear.
Mhm.
Beyond a certain point, you cannot be in a state of fear
Right,
if you're,
right, because that's I would say probably more of a dualized state in
yeah,
that
yeah.
moment. Um, oh wow. Have you had any encounter with similar since then, Sasha? Or
No, no, I've had other extraterrestrial encounters with ambassadors from star systems. One in physical in a physical meeting, and on another occasion where, curious enough, a telephone call was set up. And I had an extraordinary meeting with an agent, an off-world agent, or it was a very compelling experience, and it made absolute sense at the time. This was in 2017. And I'll never forget it. I'll never forget it. And that was a very, very remarkable meeting. So I was able to hear a voice using the electronic sphere to communicate. And that was very interesting. And there was no gain out of that for anyone playing pranks on me. There was no gain. How that had been set up was very interesting. I took the call. I spent considerable time on the call. I learned a hell of a lot from that call, and it was never repeated. Then I was told that it might repeat again in the future, but it was fine. And I was able to ask questions unfiltered and receive perfect answers in the same way that when I met a Sirius ambassador, I was able to, or
yeah,
Sirius ambassador, I was able to ask any question and have a very clarified answer given, which put everything at the time, this back in 2011, back into super context for me. So every time I've needed, but this is the thing. When a human being, okay, my favorite saying, and at the end of my workshops and things, when I do them, I oftentimes end on this point. For me, the homily or the saying that I most love is, if the prayer is fashioned aright, it'll be answered by the God in your own heart. And that to me is spirituality 101. And that to me is alpha point kissing the omega point.
yes,
If the
that's a
prayer
that's a Sashaism for sure. Okay, yes, Yeah, yeah, yeah. So things built upon, each thing leading to the next.
Yeah,
And
but it's not consecutive and it's not linear. You're
yeah.
simply in an immanent present that is a toroidal field feeding back into itself, and you are the still point in the storm of chaos. And that's how you view life. You are on that, again, you're on that axis of pure truth and right action. So, in that sense, you are gaining a state of timelessness. And to some extent, you are fending off entropy and you're fending off fear, time, entropy, and all of that. So
Mhm.
that there is a secret there. There's an alchemical secret in learning the craft of maintaining one's state of witness in that perfect state of
Yes.
grace, which
Yes.
is fearlessness.
Yeah.
Fearlessness is timelessness. It's the same thing, same quanta.
And that moment of pause, that I think in some traditions might call it the fourth moment, beyond past, present, and future, or maybe containing all of them in that zero point of which you speak. There's something really elegant in that. So thank you for just sharing a little bit. Yeah, I wanted to understand the context of like, okay, so why did this happen, particularly in '96? What was going on in your world? And thank you for sharing too about the piece about the music, the rock and roll, and how that kind of led to Morocco and so on. I'm always so interested in people's stories and how, when I look at my own awakening path, if we, want to call it that, it was pretty, I was not like, I had a steep awakening curve. And I'm always curious to know how people come to whatever it is that ignites that flame of truth within them. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, wow. Was there this encounter with the phone and the Draco and the Syrian being? I mean, would you say from your perspective now that your oversoul instigated all those encounters, those
I don't,
experiences?
I don't know that anything can manifest in the field without one's oversoul being the
Mhm.
arbiter of those
Yes.
manifestations.
Yeah.
All I know is that mine have not been fueled by magic mushrooms or marijuana or alcohol or anything like that because I've never touched anything ever once in my life. And so my engagement with the field of so-called reality is always a very circumspect and radically sober one. What to say?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, my own experiences in the programs, which we talked about on your show, like I would not have believed this stuff. I didn't have like a OET's kind of reality. So I really had to, race to keep up with something or let go of many, many things that I cherish and held dear about how this world worked and my function within it. So that's all dissipated happily so. But yeah. So, and as far as you spoke briefly there, I heard you mention alien technology. Do you have an interface at all with or knowing something further on that? Is that a passion point of yours, or can you speak to that at all? Um,
Very, very momentarily. So there's just a couple of incidents in my foundation, Humanitat, and the work that we were doing in how to put it. We were asked on a couple of occasions to get involved at a governmental level in investigating certain anomalies, which were not understood by governments and people in the governments. And so it kind of fell upon interesting intergovernmental and non-governmental organizations like mine, Humanitat, that had a certain recognition at the diplomatic level because of the way for many years I've been moving around leadership and um, launching initiatives and what have you. So, and there was the fact that we never took coin for anything, so we trusted agents in that sense. So we were on occasion asked to get involved, and also because we had a tremendous brain trust and continue to do so, where I have the access to pull in, tremendous economists or engineers or
mhm.
academics, cultural anthropologists, linguists, whatever it is, physicists. I mean, look at Lazarus Symposium, the kind of
Yeah.
scientists, academics that come constantly through the revolving door of the Lazarus Initiative is a testament to exactly what I'm saying, that I have access to the best in class in the world, scientists, innovators, thinkers, engineers, and so on. So I was on occasion asked, would we look at something and take something into our custody and investigate it forensically and then
Yeah.
do that analytic and then let the let the powers that be know what they're dealing with, what we're dealing with. So I call that area of focus weird science, and putting little teams of vanguard academics together to investigate. So that's what I did on a couple of occasions, and
Mhm.
within Humanitad, and we did deal with alien technology, and we dealt with alien phenomena. In fact, I was just a few days ago with Alan Steinfeld, a very well-known guy based in New York, but in he was one of the keynote presenters at the New Life Expo in forgive me, I can't. It was San Francisco or San Rafael,
Yeah.
and I just flew back there a couple of days ago, and I was there with Laura Eisenhower and Daniel Brinkley and other wonderful friends, and doing this conference, and Alan Steinfeld was there, and I've not seen Alan Steinfeld for almost, it must be 17 years, 16 years,
Oh,
and
wow. Mhm.
it was wonderful to see him again. And I said, we bumped into each other in the elevator, and he said, "My God, Sasha," he said, he's been watching me from afar. I've seen him from afar. And I
Yeah.
said, "Do you remember where we met, Alan?" I said, it was in the apartment in Manhattan of Professor Nancy Burson, a woman who was a Harvard professor who, at the age of 60 odd, had gone on holiday to England with her son, had walked into a crop circle that had manifested in the countryside near where she was staying. And they'd taken a walk down a country lane and seen the crop circle where a bunch of other people were milling around. And she and her son walked into the crop circle. No sooner she walked in than she starts to receive this download. And Professor Nancy Burson had this incredible epiphany in the crop circle, life-changing. And coming out of that, she starts to become a physical anomaly, a phenomena, where she was birthing self-replicating nanodiodes out of her body, coming out of her turquoise and pink and black, and, which we now understand to be Morgellons syndrome. So that was the first
Wow.
case of that I was aware of. But way beyond that, she was birthing beautiful golden amber beads, perfectly round beads, out of her hands and the soles of her feet whenever she touched water. So that became an anomaly that had to be investigated. And I did put together academics to go in to meet with her and to take forensically some of these samples and then subject them to forensic
Yeah.
analysis, which we did, and discovered that there was no diamond tool in the world that could cut through these. I mean, we studied phenomena like that. And I reminded Alan Steinfeld a few days ago, I said it was in Nancy Burson's apartment that we met. He said, "Oh, yes, that's right." In any event, that was one such incident. Another one was receiving an alien hybrid who'd been sent by German doctors to my foundation in England. And they'd asked if I would receive this alien hybrid and if we could work with her and do some analytics. And we did. And it was fascinating. It's not stuff I want to talk about now
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it's a very worthy subject, which needs a good, probably half an hour just to go into that
Just
particular.
give the yeah, yeah, yeah. And yeah, that's there's a lot to that. I had an inner riff going on as you were talking about the things coming, these how to describe what was coming out of her body. People on interviews sometimes say, well, what's going to happen with higher technology, ET technology? And I always say, we are the most advanced technology this world has ever seen.
Oh,
Period.
yeah.
That's that.
There's no doubt about that. Anything that the human technology can perceive or cogitate is something that's secondary to us and our capacitance. So indeed,
Yeah. Yeah.
we are the true children of God in that sense, as a technology, if nothing else.
Yes, yes, thank you. One more thing here. You had mentioned again, taking us back to the original conversation for Lazarus Initiative. You'd mentioned briefly some experience on the dark side of the moon. Is that something you could speak to?
Oh, again, it's a little unfair because it just
Okay.
makes me look like a sheer fantasist dropping a
Okay.
book
Okay.
on.
We could leave that.
Maybe that's our next conversation, and
Okay. Fair
I'd
enough.
be very happy to dial into that. But
Yeah.
again, I would really want 15, 20 minutes just on that piece alone.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's very intense. And yes, it happened. And it was
Yeah.
on the 1st of August, 1997. And it was a defining moment in my life, to be sure. And I
Yeah.
often think that engagement with the Draco reptilian in 96, I've often thought, I wonder if that was a necessary rite of passage for me to go
Yes.
through in order to then go through what happened to me in 1997. I almost feel it was a gaming level, and that in 97, which was on the 1st of August, I did go on a journey for 2 weeks, and it changed everything for me. It's what set me, and then I careened off to Morocco in order to recover. And so it was the reconstitution connected to that piece of geometry was to do with not solely the Imperial Draco experience, but
Yes.
also the experience that I had in August 97. It had been that whole year really a compression point in my life's experience that was so otherworldly, such extraordinary left fork in the road that I hit, that I had to reassemble my psyche, and it took a couple of years. It was only again in 1999, 2 years later, really, that I had assessed, reconstituted, and then
Yeah.
had
Yeah.
some coherent idea of where to go and how to begin that my journey. Yeah.
Yeah, and these kind of epiphanies or revelations or however or whatever language you use to describe these experiences is too small.
Yeah.
But but they can cause everything in life to 180 or fall apart or reconstruct, or we kind of fall, when all my SSP memories are coming back, I kind of fell off the map with the rest of life. I mean, it was just required. I was having a bit of a uh no words, I don't know, but it does cause that, it does cause that to happen. People in the audience at this point might be saying, well, how can I get that to happen to me? And I don't know that we can consciously, can we? Maybe that's my question to you. Can we consciously orchestrate these experiences, or what?
No, I think that we have to really convene with the atom seed of humility, which is to be very present in the now, not
Yes.
to be asking questions of the universe like, when can I be abducted into a Palladian aircraft, or when will I have an extraordinary. I mean, I think one has to just be humble in making friends with one's path as it is in the living moment, and its own, and that because that's always inviting us into humility, especially if we're leading a life which is mundane or pedestrian or boring. It's an invitation to really, really hone the state of witness into a perfect now. And that's where the bliss point is. That's where the orgasm is. That's where the eureka moment occurs once we have, in that sense, nested perfectly within the mundane,
Yeah.
in our living flame, and not to have these high expectations that, well, why don't I have the same life as, Johnny Depp, or why don't I have the same life as, Donald Trump for that matter. The people, we're always looking at icons out, or Elon Musk, anyone who's out there making billions and flying around in private jets and getting laid with, all the beautiful girls, and getting all the gold at the casino, and, that kind of nonsense. That stuff that we oftentimes look outside of ourselves and think that there's a more fascinating life out there, and it really is not the case. I have categorically learned a resounding truth on my journey, and the reason why I tour so much and I do talking and I don't charge money for my touring, I underwrite my own tours, is because I'm inquiring, I'm learning, I'm wanting to learn from the mundane.
Mhm.
I'm wanting to learn from the pedestrian. I'm wanting to convene relationship with people who, I'm learning that every individual has the most extraordinary story. It just depends on how one is able to interpret reality. So
Yeah.
I'm learning that there are people who, farmers who live in the Midwest who've been interacting with aliens and UFOs for 73 years.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
It,
Yeah.
the most incredible stories that you learn on the way. No, we each of us need to be humbled into recognizing that we steered our souls into this vector of time space, into this body, into this here and now, into this godforsaken familial line, into whatever we're born
Yeah,
into.
thank you for saying that. Yes. Yes.
And it's all a curse, and the curse is the blessing, and the blessing is the curse. And there is a space between the blessing and the curse where we meet with self, and that's the point.
And I think that brought us full circle back to that meeting with the Draco reptilian. So thank you so much. And above all, I feel like these encounters shift, at least in my experience, shift the relationship with myself so much, or what we call self, and has made me a lot more gentle and, with my own experience and hopefully with others. So what reckonings we've had through the unexpected portals that present. Sacha, anything else you'd like to add that's come up for you as we've been speaking today?
No, I'm good. I only have a hard stop in 1 minute because I've got my the head of my law commission about to arrive,
All
descend
right.
on it now, so she'll be showing her face at
All
the door.
right. Well, thank you so much. We'll put links to connect with Sacha below. I'm Rebecca Rose, Sirius Blue. You can find lots of ways to connect with me in one-on-one sessions, also in the links below. Sacha, a blessing, and we will see you again soon.
I hope so. Much love to you.
Just to mention this briefly, I have a mother and father from a previous lifetime, Indigenous mother and father, and I just call them simply mother and father. They've been with me every day for about 2.5 years. They were my parents from a previous lifetime with the Crow people, and they've helped me heal so much. They've done soul retrieval work for me. They helped me journey to get parts back. And that's actually ongoing. Like even today, I was working with them this morning. And their love is so beautifully unconditional.